and I was like, I'll do it. Like, I don't know, I want to, figure out like how I can help people. So I guess that's the social worker in me. So I wanted to talk about COVID from the standpoint of us as humans and our journey over the last year and a half. I have a lot of thoughts and a lot of things I can say. So in order to stick and not go off on tangents, I wrote this down. So I wanted to share kind of where my thoughts were and just certain points that I think are important for everyone to think about. And I think tonight what I hope is obviously we'll have a discussion, a small group discussion about reflecting on things maybe I say, and then we also have questions, prompt discussion if we need to. But I think hopefully what I want everyone to take from this is having a dialogue that you can then go out and share with people to take this and now go have similar conversations in your family circle or your friend circle or your neighborhood, to start having more of these conversations, because people aren't doing well. I have a very skewed view being at the hospital, and when you are when you're going to help somebody as a social worker, it's not because something good is happening. We're not in a good news business. So there's just been a lot of bad stuff that has been happening in the community, a lot of violence, a lot of death, a lot of just really bad things are happening, and I don't think people know how to cope. We have struggled for a year and a half, and there's very little space to process that. So I have some thoughts I'm going to share, and then we can kind of just have a group discussion, very informal, and go from there. So March 2020, the world shut down. People were scared, people were anxious, some people were getting sick, and some people were dying. Emotions were running high. Opinions about COVID were being given out everywhere you turned. We began to see our closest friends and our family disagree on facts and fiction, on what the media was telling us about COVID. The facts were that people were getting sick, people were dying, and all life was forever changed. But we all sat wondering, what and how would this end? Fast forward, it's fall 2020. We hear more and more about vaccine. We hear more and more conspiracy theories and political rhetoric that only enrage people more, increase confusion and self-doubt. The world divided more on what was truth and what was lies. Questions about the vaccine were everywhere. Who gets vaccinated, when, how, where, how do I get it? Is it safe? Should I get it? Should my kids get it? It was a lot. Then the holidays hit. They came and traditions were broken for a lot of families. Families had to decide they weren't going to see each other for a holiday. People had decided they were going to travel or not, and that caused rifts in many families. Our personal lives were dramatically altered. Our workplaces changed, schools closed, communication and how we stay connected evolved rapidly. I would say probably now everyone knows what Zoom is. A year and a half ago, maybe somebody knew what Zoom was. And now everything, telehealth exploded, everything is on the internet. For the last 16 months, we've all navigated COVID-19. We've all lived through this pandemic, but we've all had our own experiences, our own difficulties, our own stories, and our own beliefs. Not one of us had the exact same experience, and we must create space to honor it. While some were able to spend more time at home and reconnect with family, others were isolated and not able to be with loved ones. While some people were able to work from home and feel a sense of safety, others were on the front lines and exposed to COVID. Every aspect of our life had these polar opposite experiences for all of us. So when some people were embracing the fact that they got to stay home, others were getting pulled away from their families. It was just constant. It took an emotional toll, I would say, collectively on all of us. Many lives have been lost, and there's still lots of confusion. So here we are, it's July 2021. A lot has changed. We have a vaccine. Some people have gotten it, some people have not. I think Ohio is at 53% have gotten a vaccine. People have returned to work. Some people get to stay working remotely. Hospitalizations are down, but now there are clusters and pockets of COVID popping up everywhere. So it's like, what do we do? But the one thing through all of this that has been constant is our thoughts, feelings, and concerns about how we move on. There's no book for this. There's no instruction guide. We truly are creating this as we go. And there's plenty of doubt, fear, and concern in the days ahead. What is the fall and winter going to look like? We don't know. There's also hope, joy, and faith that things will improve. Things will get better. It's just the uncertainty of how and when. But I will say, our culture, our American culture, very much wants people to move on. Go to the next thing. Don't sit and be in those emotions. Move on. Go to the next day and be happy. Everyone keeps saying post-COVID. Side note, the driver's So we don't give ourselves time. It's time to process and feel what we're feeling, and we certainly don't talk about it. And a critical component of healing and moving on to a new phase of life is talking and feeling and processing your emotions. And our community, our culture is very much be in it and move on. There's very little space outside of maybe a few trusted people that we share our feelings and emotions. To talk about anxiety, depression, fear, anger, resentment is to be vulnerable and open. And many of us don't want to do that. That is why so many of us retreat and block out what we're feeling and try to ignore it. These feelings cannot be ignored. We must name them, confront them, and call them what they are. Running and hiding from them will only delay this process. And one thing from my personal experience, but also working with children and families for a long time in mental health, our feelings will find us. They will always find us. They always do, and they'll always be there for us to work through. We can't get rid of them. There's been an enormous amount of grief and loss in the past year. We've lost loved ones. We've lost our old way of living. Some have lost jobs. Some have lost family members, and some people have lost faith. And I challenge all of us to think about our grief and begin to acknowledge it, process it, and accept it. Grief has many stages. Many people tend to think that grief is very centralized around death and loss of life, which it is. However, grief is felt way more than most people realize. It is around us all the time. It can be a loss of anything. It could be a significant life change, good or bad. But grief and loss is there. We start with denial, which is confusion, fear, shock, disbelief. We tend to numb out and block what is happening around us, what is happening within us. It's a way to survive. Denial is one of the greatest things that takes care of us when we are going through grief. You numb out. That's how people can get through things, because your body takes care of itself that way. But as we kind of go through that denial phase, we move on to anger. And there's frustration, agitation. Some have a low energy level. We disengage, we pull back from people, and we're continuing to search for who and what to blame. There was a lot of that. Then we can move to bargaining. Bargaining comes next, where people are struggling to find meaning in what is happening. Why is this happening? What is the greater meaning behind all of this? For what is to get to play in our heads over and over? Oh, if this happened, what if this happened? Or what if I could have done this, or should have done that? And that plagues us. It sticks with us, and it just stays on a loop in our minds. And then some people tend to move into the phase of depression, where there are feelings of being overwhelmed, helpless, and sadness can take over. And it significantly alters just our daily functioning. People will flee social connections, stay away from social spaces, and I said this all the time at the beginning of the pandemic. I said the irony of it all is that the one thing that people need to survive trauma, stress, grief, and loss are people, and we had to keep away from everyone. It was a really, really difficult time for us. But then as the grief starts to work its way through you, many people do come to acceptance, where we feel more able to explore what are our options or what are our possibilities ahead of us. Plans develop, things start to take shape, you try new things, you put yourself out there, and you experience living again, and people tend to move on. We all experience these stages, sometimes over and over. It's never a linear process, a linear line. It's more of a circle, and sometimes backwards, forwards. It kind of goes whichever way it wants to. That's the thing about grief, you can't control it as much as you want to. But we've all felt this in this last year and a half, but it's not talked about often in that way. Coping is a word that we hear often, but many of us don't really think about it. I hope this evening we can talk about coping and talk about what has helped people cope, what has made things worse, who has helped, what have you been missing, what brings you joy, what gives you hope in all of this. There are aspects of our life that we need to pay attention to, and we'll talk about hopefully just in a few minutes. But physical health and emotional health, mental health are one. You can't separate one without the other coming along with it. So really paying attention to ourselves about our physical health, our psychological health, our emotional connectedness, our spiritual connectivity, the relationships in our lives, our profession, activities, hobbies, and many other things. But at the end of it, we're all still here. We're all living this. We're all working through it. I don't know when it's going to be over. People keep saying it's over. It's not. So I think for me, and what I'm asking everyone here today is just to be open and to listen, to truly listen to each other, just to listen, and not just to respond. That's also very much our society, our culture, is listen to get your turn. But just to truly listen and take it in, to really hear what everyone has gone through. Because you become very focused, hyper-focused on what your 16, 17 months of this pandemic was, or what your family went through. You have no idea the person sitting next to you, what they went through. When some people were happy, other people were sad. When some people were excited to be home, other people were petrified. And it's like, that's very disjointed. And how do you join and lean into each other, knowing that the experiences were so vastly different? So I can keep on talking, but I won't. What I would love for us to do is to either reflect on something that I said or something that stood out to you, questions, and then there are a few questions on the paper that I would like for this group to talk about, to really think about how do we get into this. We have to find our way. Some of us are doing it really well, others are doing it kicking and screaming, others of us rather like just sit on the couch and just say, I'll figure it out later. But we all have to do it. Life is going on, with or without a pandemic. So that's kind of what I'd like to do. I hope everyone can be open and vulnerable to people who want to talk about themselves, people want to talk about their feelings. I've learned that for the last 15, 20 years as a therapist. People want to talk about their feelings. But I hope we can do that tonight. And like I said in the beginning, I hope you can take this conversation and begin to spread it to other people. Because everyone needs to feel better. Everyone needs to be better through this. So yeah, so let's chat. Let's do that. Why don't you guys, once this table meet, we'll do